Good evening. My name is Leah Frieden, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Fayetteville Public Library. Welcome to those watching at home through live stream as well. Before you leave today, please take a moment to fill out the evaluations that we have left for you. These help us to plan for future programs. I am absolutely thrilled to have Dr. White with us this evening. A native Arkansan, John A. White Jr. earned his bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from the University of Arkansas. He began his academic career as an instructor at Virginia Tech, where he received his master's degree. Next, he taught at The Ohio State University while pursuing his doctorate. After completing his PhD, he returned to Virginia Tech, then joined Georgia Tech's faculty. In 1997, he returned to his undergraduate alma mater to be its chancellor. White stepped down from his chancellor position in 2008 and served as a distinguished professor in the U of A Industrial Engineering Department until 2019, when he retired. He continues to teach an online advanced engineering economics course for the University of Arkansas. After stepping down as chancellor, Dr. White was encouraged by colleagues to offer a course on leadership. For the following 9 years, Dr. White taught leadership practices and principles to seniors and graduate students from every discipline, introducing them to 15 guest leaders over the course of each semester and holding in-depth, frank, and often emotional conversations about the challenges, joys, heartbreaks, and diversity of approaches to successful leadership. This evening, he will be discussing his book, Why It Matters, Reflections on Practical Leadership, based in part on leadership practices and principles. Books will be available for sale and signing following the event. Please help me welcome Dr. White.
Thank you, Leah. In fact, you were doing that so well, I would like for you to just go ahead and just continue. She attended the leadership class, and so she knows a lot about what's in this already. So at any rate, thank you. I wanted to start this evening, like many presentations I've given in the past, ended, and that is with thank you, because I simply would not be here about this book if it weren't for so many others. Particularly, I would like to thank the students who took that leadership course. I'd like to thank my faculty colleagues who encouraged me to do it. I'd like to thank the staff who supported it and continue to do so. In fact, beyond those students who were in my leadership class, I'd like to thank the nearly 5,000 students who put up with me at some point in their academic career. It's hard for me to believe, but it's true. I started teaching, fell in love with it in the spring of 1963. Yes, if you did the mathematics real quickly, that's 60 years ago. And in fact, it almost coincided with me getting married to my sweetheart, Mary Lib here, and we in fact will be celebrating our 60th wedding anniversary on Thursday of this week. So at any rate, there were just so many people I wanted to thank right up front, and particularly I wanted to thank the Fayetteville Public Library for asking me to do this. It gave me a chance to reconnect with a number of people, particularly some students who've taken the class and want to come back. And I noticed when they came in, I watched Carrie carefully. I did not see any bags of tomatoes or anything like that they brought. So I think it's going to be an uneventful evening. I'm counting on it. Why It Matters. That title was not my original title. It was going to be Leadership Matters. But it turns out there was someone else who was in the process of publishing a book titled Leadership Matters. And so my publisher said, let's do something different. Well, this is different, but hopefully the subtitle of Reflections on Practical Leadership conveys a message. And that is that it's the emphasis on practice, not theory. And it's based on Leadership Principles and Practices course that I taught at the university. But let me continue right on. Well, thanks to Dr. Kim Needy here for nominating my book. It turns out she put together a terrific nomination team, and the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers selected the book to be the Book of the Year winner for 2023. So Mary Lib and I'll be in New Orleans for me to receive that award in May. So thank you, Kim, and the others who supported that. And what I found out about Kim and the other friends that I saw doing this is they're very good at creative writing. So, but also when it came out with Amazon, I was not expecting that it would be quite as popular on the outset as it was, and to be a bestseller in 6 different categories was not something that I even anticipated, and certainly didn't think that it would be ranked in the top 10 new releases in 5 different categories. But that was before people had a chance to read it. I don't know what they think now. And in fact, I'm on my LinkedIn site, I'm going to do a LinkedIn page, and it's going to be titled, "My name is not George, but I am curious." And I'm interested in what are the favorite chapters that people have within the book. That thought came to me because of a person who just wrote me a letter last week. He was the lead partner with Ernst & Young when I was chair of the audit committee at J.B. Hunt. And he had read the book, and he said, "And John, my favorite chapters were," and he told me the 3 that were his favorite chapters. So I'm interested in finding out which ones are other people's favorites. As I said, the book is a product of the leadership class. It had, as Leah said, 9 offerings. It met on Tuesday evenings from 6 to 9. And over the course of the offerings, there were 44 different guest leaders who came, and more than 250 students were enrolled in the course. It was, I've been teaching, as I said, for a long time, starting back in '63, and I've been fortunate to win a number of teaching awards and all, but this was different than anything else I had ever done. I mean, after all the other courses that I taught were about equations. How was I supposed to do a course without equations? And some way or other, we got through it. And that's mostly because of the students who were there. The course was really driven by the questions that the students asked the guest leaders who came each time. And it was that energy that was created that made us really conclude we had caught lightning in a bottle. So this was the last meeting of the class and the people who were there that evening. And you can see here, there's someone in particular right there that I know some people have recognized. And that, of course, is the daughter of Ed and Tish Pohl, Rachel, civil engineering student there. But there's also someone back there in the back, and you can recognize him because he's always the tallest in the room. And in fact, there's someone else there who just introduced me this evening, and some others you may see yourself in there and wonder why you didn't wear a different outfit. Now, these are the guest leaders that are quoted in the book, and there are 24 of them there. And not all the guest leaders are quoted because it didn't even occur to me that maybe I would want to remember some of the quotes from the early group to capture those and incorporate them in a book. I did go to each of them and get permission to include their quotes in the book because I had told them that we had 2 rules in the class, no recording and nothing that's said here goes elsewhere. We're going to be like Las Vegas. What's said here stays here. And so here, I went out, I said, I know I did that, but here are the quotes I'd like to include. May I? And they said yes. Now, all of the illustrations, the caricatures were done by Dusty Higgins. You'll want to remember that name, Dusty Higgins, as I go through this. You'll find out why momentarily. But he did other caricatures for me that are featured there. And most of those you would recognize, but you might not recognize and know. I don't know if you know Louis Epley. He lives here in Fayetteville. He was the chair of the Board of Trustees when I was hired to be the chancellor. And of course, everyone knows this person. Probably more people know who that is than know who some of these others are. But at any rate, the ones that you probably wouldn't recognize right off would be Sun Tzu, Xenophon. You might recognize Shakespeare, but Machiavelli. And those are just individuals that leads me to tell you when I submitted the manuscript to the publisher, they said, if we publish this as is, it would be 625 pages, and no one will buy a 625-page leadership book. You need to cut it in half. Well, that's like deciding which of your children you want to give up. I mean, of all things, I mean, I had labored on this. That's what I did during the pandemic. For the 18 to 24 months of that I was hunkered down, I was doing this book. So there are 4 chapters out there posted out on my website, one based on Sun Tzu's The Art of War, Machiavelli's The Prince, 8 of Shakespeare's plays, and 2 writings by Xenophon, one on Cyrus the Great Expedition and Cyrus the Great Education. Now, one of those greats was the lesser of the other, but if you're interested in that, they're posted out on my website. So moving right along, Dusty Higgins. This was in the Traveler, Arkansas Traveler newspaper, and it was following, if you might remember, there was a student who made a half-court shot and got $10,000 for it. And there was a bit of controversy around that I discussed there in the book. But afterwards, when I stepped down and asked the PA announcer to say he gets the $10,000, well, out came this, and the chancellor has a heart. And so Dusty did that, but he also did another one. And this one does not appear in the book, but because Dusty did it, I thought you should see it. And this was apparently me dealing with a fraternity issue. And that's not the fraternity that I was in as a student here. And I'm sure the people who are members of that fraternity don't appreciate the fact that he did that. So it's not in the book, but it's out on the website. And this one I thought was really clever by Vic Harville. As you know, the issue about alcohol in the stadium and about private boxes and all of that, these creative students were going to find a way to do that with their own box, but didn't make it. This was after the $300 million gift from the Walton Family Foundation. And then this one was related to the firing of Nolan Richardson, the basketball coach, when it came out. And Vic Harville, again, did that one. This is based on a comment that I made at the Chamber of Commerce meeting there in Fayetteville that I shouldn't have said what I said. At the time, I didn't recognize the impact of what I was saying, but I got called on the carpet and had to go before the legislature and to explain what I said. And I ate my words, and they didn't taste so good, really. But it wasn't just Cox that did that. It also, well, Cox did another one. This was when we were sued because one of the newspapers wanted us to provide them with a copy of the proposal we made to the Walton family that resulted in a $300 million gift. And we refused to do it. They took us to court. We wound up winning that. But then this is also about me criticizing and being criticized about the state support for higher education. And so then I chose these Dilbert cartoons before Scott Adams got in such issues over something he did out on YouTube. And now newspapers have just dropped Dilbert. But I've been doing this because he makes fun of engineers. And being an engineer, I just loved what he said. But I have, in fact, several of these sprinkled throughout the book. And hopefully you'll enjoy them. I started with one, so I ended with one. And this is what leadership is not. And so at any rate, as you go through the book, you'll understand what the motivation was for me doing it. And it was before I realized that he was going to become such a controversial cartoonist. The book is organized in 3 parts. The first part is about beginnings, and it has chapters there on defining leadership, and I cover a number of topics in that chapter, and then beginning leadership. And this is something that Dusty did for me. He took these three characters and sort of took them through the book, and every chapter begins with one of his illustrations. And here are the three individuals. They're young, emerging leaders, and they're anticipating what their journey is going to be to accomplish their goals in leadership. In that chapter, I discuss a number of things, beginning a new leadership position, the early days and the challenges that I had about the importance of doing your homework, and then on becoming a successful leader. Then I get to the issue of leadership values and attributes. And there are many, many values and attributes that a leader should have. And I go into discussion on each of those within that chapter. Then I get to chapter 2, or part 2. I chose Leadership Matters because you can do a double entendre with it. Leadership matters, but then also there are some leadership matters that you should pay attention to. So the first part was to try to convey the notion that leadership is important, that it matters. And now I'm dealing with some specific topics within leadership in the second part, beginning with communication. By far, I think the challenges that I had, certainly in leadership positions, was my inability to communicate in the way that I intended. I thought I was getting my message across, but oftentimes I was not, and had no recognition of that. And in fact, one of the things that is there in the book that is one of the funny things in retrospect about communication, we were just completing the Capitol campaign, and we had a concert by Willie Nelson at the Art Center here in Fayetteville, and I had, of course, teleprompters up, and I'm giving my remarks, and everything's going well until suddenly everything on the teleprompter changed from English to Greek. And I'm going right on, and I just continued to talk, just continued to go on and talk. Meanwhile, back in the back, I could see the staff just scrambling like crazy. What went wrong? What went wrong? And so then they finally straightened it out, and I just picked right up and went right on. They were accustomed to that because when I was at commencement exercises, I told them, I said, look, because we had teleprompters there as well, I said, don't be concerned if I go off script. I'll do walkabouts, but I'll come back to it, so you just hang in there with me. In this case, I did a walkabout and let them figure out what was going on with their teleprompter. But I deal with a number of different communication topics in that chapter. Then I get to leadership paradoxes. And here, there's so many that leaders are faced with where they are conflicting things that you wind up having to do. You're both serving, but you're also leading. There's a need to be consistent, but at times you need to be unpredictable. There's a need for integrity, but you also at times have to be deceptive. You can't just let everything be known. There's just some things that have to be kept quiet. And so I go through and I give examples throughout in dealing with those paradoxes. And as I said, there are lots of them. Many people think that the leader is supposed to know all the answers. No. The leader really needs to ask all the questions, and that you want the answers to come from the team. And so you work through that, and if they then develop those answers, then they're going to take much more ownership of what you wind up with as a decision. Then I get to the issue of balance. And I'll just tell you, not to bias you, this was one of the 3 chapters that was the favorite of the person who contacted me last week. I thought, how interesting. I think I know why. But because there I deal with the issues about balancing family and career, about balancing your emotions, having to balance a short-term perspective and a long-term perspective, of predictability and unpredictability, of transparency and secrecy, of the internal and external demands on you as a leader, on deciding and delegating, on speaking and listening, on standing firm and yielding, on making decisions based on quantitative information and qualitative. The issue of breadth and depth of leadership, permission and forgiveness. I believed in asking for forgiveness, not asking for permission. And that would get me in trouble occasionally. Fortunately, I had a president of the system who had my back, and when I messed up, then he was forgiving, though I would come back and make amends in some way, have to reverse my decision in other instances. And then you get to the last one about balance in your life, that you're going through life and you're juggling balls, and some of them are crystal and some of them are rubber, and you dare not drop the crystal ones. And those are relationships. That's about faith. It's those things that are so important. But then the rubber balls are things, and the students didn't appreciate that at the time, that here was a professor saying one of those rubber balls is the grades that you make. It's your salary. It's what's on your business card. It's your zip code. What kind of car you drive. Those things are rubber balls. Pay attention to the crystal balls and don't drop those, because like Humpty Dumpty, they can't be put back together again. Then there's the issue of direction. And here we are, and we got the people in the boat and everyone wanting to go in a different direction, and you wind up with that. No matter what organization you're leading, you're going to have conflicts in which direction you should go. But you need to establish what's the purpose of the organization. And by the way, not only does this direction apply to an organization, it applies to an individual. What's your purpose statement? What's the purpose for you being here on earth? What's your vision? And then what's the vision for the organization? And then about mission and goals and objectives and strategies and tactics and core values, and then ending up with strategic planning. And then the issue of cultures. Cultures are critically important. And so many of our graduates will go into an organization and quickly realize they don't fit. And also, as they would ask these guest leaders who would come and meet with them about why they have turnover at executive levels within the organization, often it was about lack of fit, culture. And I went to work with Tennessee Eastman Company. It didn't take me very long being there to realize that I didn't fit, that it wasn't the place where a square peg was going to be in a square hole. And it wasn't until I wound up in graduate school and had a chance to teach that I realized that where the square hole was for this square peg to fit, and it was in teaching. So in there, it's about knowing the culture, doing everything you can to understand the culture before you make the decision to join. And if in fact you find that the culture is not what you want, you have three choices. One, to not go there, or go there and adapt to that culture, or attempt to change the culture. When I came back home to my alma mater, I realized after Mary Lib and I went around the state and hearing from so many people about the university that its image and reputation was quite different than it was when I was a student 36 years before. And so I recognized that we needed to change the culture of the university. And so and you don't do that quickly. You don't do that inexpensively. And the only way that you're going to be able to achieve it is to stay the course, and with persistence and with patience, sometimes called stubbornness. And so I discussed the issues of culture within that chapter. Then you get to decisions and mistakes, and this was the second of the three chapters that my friend said was his popular one. But here you see the three now in their journey, and they have to make a choice. And you can see that if they go in this direction, there's some things awaiting them that could be not so nice, okay? So trying to make the right decision. I go through the decisions that I made, that I messed up on, and some that we made that were good decisions along the way. As I say, communication was my biggest challenge. So I used what's called the 6W1H process, namely with respect to decisions. Why is a decision being made? What is the decision that's called for? Who's going to make it? When should it be made? Where should it be made organizationally? And which decision among alternatives should you choose? And then how do you go about making that choice? Same thing with respect to mistakes. Why did the mistake occur? What mistake was it? Who made it? When was it made? Where was it made? And then which in there is an interesting one, and I'll leave it to you to explore that. And then how was the mistake made? Just go through and analyze that. And by the way, don't create an environment in which people are afraid to make mistakes. You have to create an opportunity for people to make mistakes and know that it's not a terminal mistake. Now, there are some mistakes that a leader could make. If it's a bet the farm kind of a decision and it goes wrong, then that was a big mistake. You don't want to repeat those. Then it gets to leadership teams. And here you see our three individuals trying to figure out how to assemble their team, because that's where you start, with assembling it, of choosing people, selecting people. And often what you're doing is you're refereeing disputes among the people on your team. You might say, oh, no, that wouldn't happen. Oh, yes, it happens. And then you have to assess the performance of the team members, and you have to help them advance. You have to compensate them. Then at times you have to change the team. Jim Collins, in his book Good to Great, talks a metaphor of a bus. And there's some times that you have to have people get off the bus and put some new people on the bus. Then it gets to the third favorite chapter of this gentleman who contacted me last week, the leadership nitty-gritty. This was, and none of you, I suspect, in here are old enough to know about Fibber McGee's Closet. But back in the olden days, there was this radio show with Fibber McGee, and he stuck everything in the closet. This was my chapter for putting the things in that didn't fit anyplace else, I felt. And in fact, I think this is when Dusty Higgins decided that he would put me there at the keyboard doing it. And I appreciate the fact that he showed me losing some weight in the process. It was nice. But what to include in that chapter? It's my favorite chapter because I got to explore things. But defining success. What's your definition of success? And what you're going to find is it changes throughout your career. It changes over time. Defining success for me started out, it was sort of all about me. And then got to the point where it was all about the team. That I realized that my goal was not to be the best leader of the team, but to be the leader of the best team. It's all about the team. That's why students were so important to me at the university. That's the reason I was in the university. It was all about the students for me. And then there's the challenge that you have, particularly in academia, that you're leading leaders. And in fact, Peter Drucker called them knowledge workers. He was way ahead of his time on that. But these are individuals that probably know more than you do, could leave and get better pay than what you're paying them. I mean, it's faculty members, it's attorneys, it's doctors, it's nurses, all of these that you're trying to do. Then got into the subject of mentoring and networking. And Donnie Smith from Tyson Foods, the CEO there, he had a saying, say it in the room. And that, when he said that, it resonated with me because I could remember so many times when we would all reach agreement, quote unquote, within the room. And as soon as people left, they were all going in different directions. There was not agreement. So if you've got something that you don't agree with, say it in the room. And then one of don't fence me in. And this was one that my son helped me understand about it. And he talked about that. I said, oh, yes. Then moments that matter, defining moments and tipping points. And I go into detail on 4 in that chapter. One of those is that $10,000 shot from half court. And then the notion of keeping score, slicing pies. People seem to think that if someone gets a larger slice, they'll get a smaller slice. And my whole objective was to make the pies bigger. So everyone's slice was bigger. And then the notion of pruning. It's important to stop doing things, to just stop doing them, and just to cut them off. And then the importance of the bully pulpit. And I certainly use that, particularly with respect to the subject of diversity. And then the notion of failing. And then finally, if the hat fits, wear it. Because some people want to say, oh, well, I wear different hats. No, as a leader, no matter where you go, if you're a very visible leader, everyone's going to know you're that leader. That it's not going to be possible for the Razorback basketball coach to go someplace outside of basketball season and do something that's inappropriate for the head coach of University of Arkansas Razorback basketball team. Okay? That you can't just say, well, you know, I'm no longer at job, I'm there, I'm out in the community, or I'm in the church, or I'm this or that. No. Wherever you go, you are that same person. You're not different people. Now, you may want to be, but it's not going to happen. And then the moving on, getting fired, and retiring. This is sort of bringing it to a closure, that you have to know when to move on. That Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them. And then the notion about getting fired, and then what? And then the notion of retiring. I flunked retirement, but there's the leadership transition. It's important in that. Then I get to the final part 3. And so I thought, okay, how do I sort of bring together all the different things that I touch on within the book? And I talked then about keys to A's. And I came up with 25 words, all beginning with the letter A, that a leader needs to pay attention to. In fact, interestingly, the editors with the publisher, they wanted me to leave this chapter out because they said it's repetitive on other things in it. But my son said, Dad, he said, this is the most important chapter in your book. It's the one that I use because I go back and I look at those things to make sure that I don't forget some of them. He said, you got to keep it. So I told the publisher, I said, okay, I'm going to use it as my summary chapter. And so they said, fine. So there are 25 words there. And I'm sure you can come up with other words starting with the letter A that are important. In fact, I've thought of a few myself, but I liked the number 25. I thought at some point I got to stop on this list. So what's interesting, a lot of people want to start with ability. That's at the bottom of my list. At the top of my list is attitude. I think it's by far the most important. It's about attitude. And Shelley Simpson, the president at J.B. Hunt, said there are 2 things that you can control, your attitude and your effort. And so that to me is so important. It reminded me of something my dad said. He was a teacher and my mom was a teacher. Together they had 70 years in the public school systems of Arkansas. But Daddy said, there's nothing more rewarding and better than working with a turned-on, excited student. And there's nothing worse than working with one who's got a bad attitude. That's like going bird hunting and having to carry the dog. It's no fun at all. And but it's, attitude makes such a difference. But anyway, that's the keys to A's chapter. Then the final reflections. And here the 3 are sort of at the end of their journey, looking back over what they've done in their leadership journey and reflecting on how they feel about it. And so I reflect on my leadership journey. And I have a section there about time will tell and how I'm perceived as a leader, because things change, and they change so quickly, and they have in this country, they have in this world. So time will tell. Then I have some additional thoughts, and those additional thoughts actually were the things about my website. And so if you go out to johnahwhitejr.com, Why It Matters, it turns out that there are a number of things available to you there. And if you go to page 287 in the book, there's a password that will take you on to exclusive bonus material, and that's those extra chapters, and then things that were not included in the chapters because I had to strip so much out of them, but I have those in there as well. And because one of the examples about a mistake, quote unquote, or failing, with respect to one of the explorers trying to get to the South Pole, and discussed that in it, then I thought, well, I will share some of the photos of when I went to the South Pole, my Antarctic trip. Then the echoes, that's the 4 chapters from the past. That's the Sun Tzu, that's the Xenophon, Machiavelli, Shakespeare things. And then I also wrote 3 chapters on governing boards, and governing boards for universities, for corporations, for nonprofit organizations. And then there's a gallery of caricatures in Why It Matters in the bonus material by Dusty. So now let me pause and see if there are questions, but before you do, I would like to do something. I'd like to read you a section from the book, and what I want to read from is out of those keys to A's. I chose one, and it's affirmation. And it goes like this, and those of you who took the class, I will start out with something that you will remember very much from the course. Teddy Roosevelt is credited with saying, quote, "Nobody cares how much you know till they know how much you care," end quote. Caring for the people you lead and affirming their importance and value to you, the team, and the organization are keys to being an exemplary leader. Leaders not only can but must affirm followers. As Lou Tice notes in Smart Talk for Achieving Your Potential, quote, "Every good leader is a genius at positively affirming other people," end quote. When Walmart's former senior vice chairman, Don Soderquist, met with a leadership class, he said that a defining moment for him professionally was when Walmart's chairman and CEO, Sam Walton, told him he was extraordinary. Chris Lofgren, by the way, who wrote the foreword to the book, reinforced Soderquist's comment by telling the students, quote, "Nothing is more powerful than someone believing in you," end quote. Jeff Long, who was our athletics director when I was chancellor, said his high school football coach saw something in him he didn't know he had, reminding him of the importance of having someone see in you an ability you don't see in yourself. Pam McGinnis, vice president with Phillips 66, delivered a similar message. She told the students a high school guidance counselor encouraged her to go to college, something McGinnis had given no thought to doing. General Marty Steele, he's one of the 3 featured in the book, The Boys of 67. There were 3 who enlisted in the Marine Corps as privates and retired as generals. Grew up here in Fayetteville, but General Marty Steele emphasized the need for leaders to be affirming. He said it's important to convey to your followers that they, quote, "really do make a difference," end quote. He instilled this attitude in his troops. His number 1 rule was that his people were not allowed to publicly say anything untoward about a fellow soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, even in jest, because of the need for intrinsic trust and confidence required of his men and women. He wanted his team members to have each other's back all the time and everywhere, not just in combat situations. While serving as NSF, that's National Science Foundation's assistant director, I wanted people in the engineering directorate to know I cared for them. Each week I stopped at a nearby Hallmark shop and purchased birthday cards for each person having a birthday in the coming week. I wrote a small note in each card, thanking the person for everything he or she was doing for me, NSF, and the nation. It was a little thing, but I wanted people to know I knew what they did and I cared. At the end of my 3-year appointment, NSF held a reception for me. Everyone in the engineering directorate was invited to stop by for refreshments and to wish me farewell. I'm sure there were some speeches, and I probably spoke about how much my time working with them meant to me, because those 3 years were the most impactful years of my professional career. However, what I remember about the occasion is not what I said or what people said about me. Instead, it was what happened as people drifted out of the room. Three women were huddled together. 2 were consoling a colleague who was crying. When I went over to speak to them, the woman who had been crying looked up at me and said, "Oh, Dr. White, I'm going to miss you so much." I quickly assured her that I knew my successor was going to do a terrific job. She said, Dr. White, you don't understand. You're the only person who ever gave me a birthday card. I have all 3 of them pinned on the wall in my cubicle. Little things mean a lot. Sic parvis magna, great things from little things come. My son must have picked up on this because he told the students in the leadership class, focus on the little things. Judith McKenna, who's executive at Walmart, I think she's now responsible for international. She told the students, what really matters to people are the tiny, noticeable things that happen every day. She said TNTs, tiny, noticeable things, can be powerful. When Mary Lib was in Washington Regional Hospital for a pacemaker and defibrillator implant, a young man walked into her hospital room and introduced himself to us. He said, Chancellor White, you won't remember me, but when I was a UA student, you stopped one day when it was raining and gave me a ride to my class. Oh yes, I interrupted. I remember picking you up near Razorback Stadium. I tried to get you to put your backpack in the back seat, but you insisted on placing it on the floor at your feet. I took you to Bell Engineering Center. He told us that after graduating electrical engineering, he accepted a position with Medtronic in Tulsa, but was recently transferred to the VA hospital in Fayetteville. When he saw my wife's name on the list of people scheduled for a Medtronic implant, he asked if he could do it because of what I did for him that rainy morning. A few years later, Mary Lib had to have the device replaced, and there he was again. He said, as long as I am working here, you can count on me to take care of Mrs. White. These examples weren't big deals to me, but they were for the people on the receiving end. Little things mean a lot. Affirmation matters. It's important for leaders to affirm their followers, but it's also important for leaders to engage in self-affirmation. In personal coaching for results, how to mentor and inspire others to amazing growth, Lou Tice notes, quote, to affirm something means to literally make it firm, solid, more real. Through repetition, what you think becomes a belief. Beliefs become behaviors. And as Tice notes, behaviors create experiences and results. So with that, let me now turn to any questions anyone would like to ask. Surely there are some questions. Well, are there rebuttals? Is there a minority report that would want to be? Is there someone who wants to object to the way that I graded their papers and looked for how many that's they had in their paper? Those of you who don't understand, I mean, I graded those papers, and there was more red ink on papers than some students had ever seen in their careers, total together, because they were just covered with red ink. And at any rate, Dr. Needy.
I do have a question.
Yes.
So as you got towards the end of preparing this manuscript, poring over all of the interviews and the experiences from the class and mountains of books that
Yes.
became part of that,
Yeah.
was there anything, kind of like an aha, a synthesis, like that just hit you after kind of looking through all of that?
Well, no, there really wasn't. But what it was is I was pretty tired. I was pretty tired. But I was also frustrated. As Dr. Needy knows, because she's one of the co-authors with me on a textbook that won a Book of the Year award, that I'd done 6 textbooks, and 3 of those had won Book of the Year awards. And yet none of the publishers of those textbooks was interested in publishing a leadership book. Said there are just too many leadership books. Not going to do it. So I was frustrated, but I wound up with a great publishing team with Greenleaf Book Group, and I dealt with 3 different editors going through it. The first one was the one who, I think, that was the one who was told to wear the black hat and say it has to be cut in half, And then I went with another, and the issue there of taking out stuff was that his argument was there was too much that was University of Arkansas focused. or too much about Georgia Tech or things like that. And so there are a number of examples, almost for every example in the book about something, there are one or two others that weren't included because he said they were redundant. And at the end, I guess I was just glad to have gotten through that process. And I thought, how then do I keep the materials that didn't make it into the book? As Paul Harvey would say on his radio show, the rest of the story. Well, this is the rest of the book. So that's when I came up with the idea of establishing a website and to go out and set it up. And it's been really interesting for me. I mean, given my age and all, here I am, I'm blogging, I'm doing all of these things, you know, like I have a clue what's going on. And I've been doing all these podcasts and things like that result from that. But at the end, my aha moment was, I really hate it that so much of this is not going to wind up being available to people who might benefit from it, especially what the leaders had said, because I have a lot of quotations in the book, but I don't even have, that's just I just skimmed. There's so many others. So now what I've been doing is posting on my LinkedIn page these quotes from these leaders that didn't make it into the book. Like Greg Brown, the chairman and CEO of Motorola Solutions. He had so many because he was at every offering of the course. He was, Mike Duke was, and Chris Lofgren was. Those were the three who were at all of the offerings of the course. And so they had so many quotes that I didn't just want to say, throw them away, not on the cutting room floor, because there was such wisdom there. It was just great. I learned more about leadership through that leadership class, I think, than I did in my entire career. It's what I learned from these people, what they shared. And Leah mentioned that it was emotional. I mean, they came and they opened kimono. They just absolutely were honest with the students. Each semester, there would be at least 3 of the guest leaders who would be in tears, talking about the sacrifices that they made in leadership. I remember I asked a person who was on the Motorola board with me, I didn't expect to get the answer. I said, tell me, how do you balance family and career? He said, it cost me my first marriage. I thought the person he was married to was his first wife. I had no idea. He said, and his wife that we knew said, she came from business, she understood what the pressures and demands were on a corporate CEO. Then I asked another one, and I knew what he was going to say. How do you balance family and career? And he said, I'm the poster child in how not to do it. I'm a failure as a husband. I'm a failure as a father. And no success at work will offset failure at home. He left that Tuesday night. And after he left, I turned to the class and I said, he'll be in divorce court Thursday for the 2nd time. Well, I'm very pleased that he is now married. The children that he had with his second wife, who his second wife had basically turned against him, he's reconnected with them. He's in great shape now. But he remarried after he retired as chairman and CEO of a corporation. So there are those kinds of things that just, I felt like I should do this. And the big motivation really for me to do it occurred, as the former students in the class know, that when things were posted about the course on the evaluation system the university does, anonymous, they consistently said it's the most demanding course I've taken, it's the best course I've taken, and it changed my life. That wasn't the case for a student in my last offering of the course. He said, Dr. White said it would be the most demanding, and it was. He said it would be the best course, and it was. He said it would change my life, but it didn't. It saved my life. And I knew I had to write the book. Because if there was anything in there that could possibly communicate with someone who felt like they were at the end of the rope and what to do next, I needed to try to do it. And that class asked me if I would write a book and try to capture in the book what happened within the class. Well, there's no way that this book captures that because of the dynamic interaction that the students had with the guest leaders. But I've tried as best I can to include as much of the wisdom that came from those guest leaders as I could. And that's why I was insistent on doing something like with my website to make sure the things are there that didn't make it into the book. Any other questions? Well, in that case, then I certainly want to end as I began. And thank you for coming and being here this evening. If no one had showed up, I would be relying on those of you who are watching it online to let me know that you were there. Otherwise, I'd feel like I was the tree that fell in the forest and no one was there, and I didn't even make a sound. Thank you very much. Leah, now it's up to you, I guess, what happens next. I have no clue.
So Carl's is here selling books in the back, and we're going to get Dr. White set up at this table. If you have a book that you would like for him to sign, he would be glad to do so.
Yep. Good, thank you.